Hello, everybody here in the room and out there on Crowdcast. I think we're going to get underway now. Thank you all so much for being here. And sorry, but you can also hang out afterwards and keep the good vibes rolling. So I appreciate you all being here. Really exciting to welcome Quan Barry in celebration of Auction, which is a tremendous book, and we're thrilled to celebrate. My name is Mike Wendt. I'm the program director here at Woodland Pattern. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement and say that we at Woodland Pattern acknowledge that here in Milwaukee we live and work on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homelands along the southwest shores of Michigami, part of North America's largest system of freshwater lakes, where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. We further acknowledge the grave evil colonialism introduced to these lands through genocide as well as slavery, but also via racist and xenophobic beliefs, laws, and practices that continue to inflict harm upon Black, brown, and indigenous lives. We honor those who have lived and do live now at these intersections of identity and experience and are committed to the active dismantling of white supremacy. Many thanks once again to you all. Thanks, Quan, for being here. Thanks. A huge thanks, of course, to you for being here, and also to Daniel and to everyone at Boswell Book Company for helping us organize this and for partnering with us on this event and also an event earlier this month. Really terrific reading with Ross Gave that took place at Boswell. So thank you. As with all of our readings, we're presenting this one on a give what you can basis. We're a nonprofit organization, and your individual donations go a long way towards helping us continue to put on programs of this kind. So if you're in a position to give, we greatly appreciate you considering that. But of course, you just being here is a tremendous form of support, so we thank you for that in and of itself. And we have copies of Auction as well as other books by Quan Barry for sale, so please visit the bookstore after the reading, and then this is the last part of the business here. Then upcoming events, we hope that you'll join us. Actually, a few things happening this weekend, or a couple things. Tomorrow night on the 27th is Resound Return, our monthly open mic. That's at 7 p.m. It's a really great time, usually great company, just not all, I'm just kidding. I don't know why I said usually great company. Always great company. And great poetry, and yeah, that's a really good time. So tomorrow at 7. And then Sunday, this Sunday we're celebrating the current exhibition that's up right now. Here I Am Standing, new works by Hiram Lee. There will be a reception that runs from 1 to 5 p.m., an artist talk at 2 p.m. It's really a tremendous exhibition, and I hope you'll join us to celebrate on Sunday if you can. And then finally, I have to mention that registration for our poetry marathon, our 30th annual poetry marathon and benefit is open right now. You can sign up to join if you would like. There's still space available. It'll be a virtual event once more, so it'll be 24 hours over 2 days at the end of January, featuring pre-recorded readings, films, short films, musical performances, other multimedia works. So consider taking part if you'd like, or just tune in and maybe hopefully support. And finally, just with regard to tonight, I wanted to let you know that there will be time for questions after the reading. So, consider that as the reading is happening. This includes everyone tuning in online, you can share questions via the chat, and we can read those on your behalf. So I hope you'll consider that. And now it's a great pleasure to introduce Quan Barry. At one point in Auction, she writes, quote, "I will not deaden myself to anything, even the darkest dark. This refusal to look away and insistence upon articulating some of the worst things of which humans are capable, which is of perennial importance, seems utterly so now amidst genocidal conflicts abroad, as well as fascism and genocidal ideologies here in the U.S. Quote, in these days of closed fists, where the four chambers of the heart clench the hours. But while bearing witness in itself is important, So too is art's capacity to imagine other ways to be with one another. As Barry quotes a young activist saying, art, quote, art is the space in which we might imagine what freedom looks like. She goes on, another quote, imagination as agency. And indeed, Quan Barry uses her own attentive and vivid imagination to reckon with the most difficult aspects of life on this planet, in this universe, while at the same time recognizing its promise, all through deft juxtapositions that synthesize variegated knowledges, images, and ideas that express the fluidity of Barry's own thought, as well as our own human sense of time, being, and self as nonlinear. She does all of this with incredible compassion and a sense of the, quote, webs within webs that connect us all. Another quote, I mean, Quan Barry says it best herself, but thank you for indulging me. In our family tree, animal ancestors, vegetable ancestors, mineral ancestors. At the heart of this writing seems a sense of openness and interconnection, a sense of life that is international, but also interspecies, indeed interbeing, to borrow from Thich Nhat Hanh. And in response to these days of closed fists, we'd all be well advised to hear Quan Barry when she relays, quote, what the darkness told me, expand. Please welcome Quan Barry.
I like it. It's loud clapping. Yay, fabulous. Thank you so much. Can you hear me, or do I need to actually be closer to this, or will people still on the video hear me even if I'm not directly in front of the microphone? So thank you all for coming. Thank you to Woodland Pattern. Thank you to Boswell's, again, for helping organize, and thank you for coming out tonight, or thank you for being at home and tuning in. So this book is called Auction. I'm going to read about 7 or 8 poems. We'll see how time goes. And then I will take any questions, if there are any questions folks have. And then I'll finish up with one final poem. So the title poem of the collection is called Auction. And it's actually the first poem in the collection. I basically wrote this poem after having an experience at a writer's residency in Saratoga Springs, Yaddo, which many people may know. Saratoga Springs is horse country. It's a place that in the last few years, at least when I was there, they had built a very nice and very expensive pavilion for horses. And so you could actually go and watch horses being auctioned off. And so one night, a group of the artists from Yaddo decided to walk down the hill and go see a horse auction. And so this poem details our experience at it. I would say, too, there is a phrase in here, the Latin phrase, ecce homo, which I'm sure many people are familiar with, but basically, ecce homo in Latin is behold the man. And again, it's what Pontius Pilate says when he presents the beaten Christ to the mob. So just to keep that in mind. Auction. What was I wearing? I don't recall. I remember walking down a series of switchbacks away from the Italianate mansion where all of her children died. Night was entering, inching over the world horizontally from right to left, the moon's structured whiteness and objet d'art. Then we arrived at the beautiful space filled with beautiful gold-flecked people. Everywhere, strings of light, illuminated filigree, a world web with stars, the feeling of bodily effervescing. No, I hadn't been to the track. I had heard that was where squalor lived, a barely contained seediness that was allowed. I am one who has been reared to prefer the cultivated, even the men trailing with push brooms in tuxedos as they sweep up the bready droppings that break apart so easily, loosing their fragrance of grass and earth. Why should this veneer fail me now? Watching the crowd lean forward, smelling their hunger, the sound of the gavel falling like a cudgel on a head, and the good people rushing forward to shake the hand of the victorious. I saw our history in it, roped right there in the ring. The muscled beauty of excellence, the monocular acuity, how the breadth of the eye evolved for speed. It stood on the dais as the groom lovingly turned its best side to the light, its best side being every side, coat gleaming like blackest water. The whole room instantly aroused, the men's pants tenting, the women with their sun's secretions, as happens when you are in the presence of the holiest of forms. It was looking at us with an awareness beyond time, casting its 50-foot parabolic gaze broadly over the earth. Admittedly, as my mind filled with images of heated brands and whips, I thought of Christ last, the petals of blood licking his face. It was every being who has ever stood center stage in chains, all of us implicated simply by being there, regardless of sympathy or intent. Ecce homo. Then I heard a voice shout 2.2 and another go higher. The most pragmatic teaching Jesus ever gave: render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God's. The gavel finally falling on 2.8 million. But what if we don't know the difference? No, it wasn't just my presence that made me a participant to spectacle, which explains why I've carried this haunting ever since. He said, "The poor will be with us always," and I ran with it. I let me off the hook. Then the groom, tuxedo dark as ink, himself descended from such brutality, turned and let it out. So as I always tell people after I read like a poem, like, that's basically what I do. It's a little sad, a little dark. So if anybody wants to leave now, feel free. But yeah. So having said that, I'm going to read a couple of poems that are, so I've written a novel. My last novel that came out is called When I'm Gone, Look for Me in the East, and it takes place in Mongolia, and it follows the story of Buddhist monks in Mongolia who go out into the countryside to find a reincarnation. And so the next two poems that I'm going to read are definitely Buddhist adjacent. I don't actually call myself a Buddhist, but I do like to think of myself as a Buddhist sympathizer. And so again, this first poem is simply called Refuge, and it's very the Buddhist influence is very light, but yes, so I think of it as a particular teaching that's very important to me. So, Refuge. Neither the estrangement nor the homecoming, nor the 4 dormant orchids on the sill, not glitter or the dust, exegesis or wonder, the unfathomable love stilled at Land's End. Not the resistance, the doubt, the unchecked box, the rejection, the heart-soft crown left slightly puckered by the scar. Not nights in the interminable dark down on the knees, not the story or the after-image, light streaming around the body, its grim pilgrimage. Not what is, not what isn't, neither air nor the void, neither the here nor the there, just this. I'm very grateful for the lighting in this room. I just, last Friday, I had an eye appointment, and so I'm probably due to get reading glasses. And so I'm noticing when I give readings that I can read without glasses, but I have a hard time looking up and then focusing really fast as I look back down. And so 3 weeks from now, when I have glasses again, I'll be able to look up much more fluidly than now. I feel like a deer in the headlights, like, I'm going to find my place. But so far, it's been working out. And again, it helps that it's very, very bright light here. And so the poem I'm going to read next is actually one that Michael just quoted from. It's just simply called Poem. But again, I've been fortunate in Madison. I think of Madison as being a great place for Buddhists. And a friend of mine and I, we actually did like what we called our Buddhist world tour, because there's so many different traditions that are present in Madison. So you have the Zen, you have Theravadan, you have the Tibetans, you've got everything in between. And so we sort of were hopping around and going to different sanghas and just checking things out. So this particular poem is about an experience I had at one of the sanghas that we visited. Poem. Just 2 Saturdays ago, I sat on Jan's living room floor and demanded it. Said I do not want what the Buddha wanted for us, to live without suffering. This edifying force, as I believe the body needs to know when it has been harmed. To know trauma, which, if a color, would be the same shade as blood pooled under the eye. That I embrace pain because the universe is a wonder, and I will not deaden myself to anything, even the darkest dark, which means even the photo of the young boy in the arms of his smiling captors. How right there in the truck bed on a dusty road in blank, One of them will take what the article describes as a dull knife and, like a violinist sounding a long nocturnal note, saw the child's head off, knocking the air from my lungs, like the time I fell off a ladder, creating a vacuum at the center of me, as I have been doing all summer. Me with the money and the time to learn to breathe underwater, on my knees 30 feet deep in Mendota, my body sheathed in 2 wetsuits, neoprene gloves and a hood, 20-plus pounds cinched around my waist to counter the buoyancy in an attempt to exhibit competency at the basic skills, such as taking my mask off in 53-degree water with less than 2-foot visibility. The sun cold like the back of a hand to the face, causing the gasp reflux to kick in, the thrashing like a beached fish as I breathe through both my regulator and my nose. How I stay breathing like that, taking both air and water into my lungs in equal measure, only to learn that Kim is right, that as long as I am taking in air, I can inhale water for a long time without dying. I can live through this darkest dark. The 2 teenagers in Janesville in full body armor with assault rifles lurking at the edge of the protest. And X says they put themselves in between the crowd and the teenagers, and it was fine in the way things are fine these days, in the way we all just keep going. And so I remember that summer moment in the lake, the way I kept going for 1 full minute, breathing in these 2 contradictory elements, water and air, desperate for the tiny piece of paper that would certify I can do this, what we all do, day in, day out, living on through the terrible wonder of what should be unlivable. Yeah, so. I don't give many readings. I don't read very often publicly, especially in Wisconsin, or I shouldn't say especially in Wisconsin, but I try to be somebody who, I try to be very, I read once in Madison from this book, and then I'm reading here. And so I try, though, when I read, at least in the same state, to not give the same reading that I've read in the past, because so many of these readings are taped and people could just see you online. And so it's the feeling that if you read the same poems, people maybe already saw that. So you want to give people something different. So I'm going to try reading something that is different, which I've never read out loud before. It's so within the book Auction, there's kind of a mini book that happens. And the mini book is called Dies and Das Pocket Field Guide to Occupied Lands. And I actually have this is the galley version of the book, so this is not the final version. In the galley version, at first I thought I was going to include an actual photo that would show you the book cover of this mini book that happens, but I decided for various reasons to take out this photo. So just to tell you a little bit about the mini book that I'm about to read, some years ago I was in Austria, and they have one of the world's largest military history museums. I realized I should have looked up how to pronounce it because it is in a poem, and I realized I don't. I might just say Vienna's Military History Museum instead of saying the name of it. But when I was in this military history museum, they had this amazing display of propaganda books, and many of them, some of them were full-sized and were propaganda books. Some of them were aimed at children, and those were the ones that I found most disturbing. So they were these little picture books full of propaganda about the other, and again, they were really terrifying in various ways. And so I began to think about what that would be like to write some of them were meant for soldiers, for example, and they were tiny. They were pocket-sized guides that a soldier would take with them as they went into a land that they were occupying, and these guides would tell the soldiers untrue, terrible things about the native population. And so I just began to think about what would that be like to write one of these. So I've written what I consider to be a pocket-sized propaganda book about an occupied people. But as you'll hopefully hear, that the occupied people who are discussed in this book actually sound kind of awesome. And so it's the idea that, again, propaganda isn't always what we think it is. But having said that, I actually wrote a foreword to this book that I ended up writing. So I'll read the foreword, and then I will start reading from the actual pocket-sized book. All of the poems in the pocket-sized book are all 7 lines long. And so I like to tell my students, although it's not true, that I have invented a new form. So many poets probably know the form the golden shovel, which was invented by Terence Hayes, or there's the form the duplex, which was invented by Jericho Brown. So I have invented my own form, and I call it the egg. So the egg is just simply a 7-line poem. And it's because I think that 7 lines is the perfect, supposedly an egg is the perfect food because it has the right combination of minerals and protein and carbohydrates. And so to me, the 7-line poem is perfect because it's just long enough to get something done, but it's not long enough to get stuck in a quagmire of sorts, right? So I think the egg is the perfect poem. So these are all eggs, except for the forward, which is longer. So. Forward. Yesterday, after skimming an article on the 14 characteristics of such regimes, I stumble on this description of fascism. We no more saw it developing from day to day than a farmer in his field sees the corn growing. He simply wakes one morning to find it is over his head. The way we allow things to take root, each night silence sprouting in the earth, like the children's books I saw in the Vienna's Military History Museum, or the one in my dream. On the cover, a small flaxen-haired boy, somewhere in nature tending his geese, stands happily watching as the hooked-nosed enemy is marched out of town. The book titled Das on Das, Pocket Field Guide to Occupying Lands, with an epigraph from Dmitri Shostakovich, There can be no music without ideology. How the word propaganda comes from the world of horticulture, to graft one plant onto another. Dear reader, please forgive me this tangent. The landscape of these alien fields appeared so sweet, so contrary to what I'd been told. So, Dies und Das, Pocket Field Guide to Occupied Lands, and again, the epigraph is, There could be no music without ideology, Dmitri Shostakovich. The landscape of these enemy combatants is the fastest way to recognize their incapacity for self-governance. Too much green space, too many fountains, even the horseflies allowed to drink from the well. And who knows what riches lie untapped beneath their soil. In their cities, whole districts with their Art Deco facades still intact. Their agriculture unmodified, their rivers undammed. It's a mystery they get anything done. The top tax rate some astronomical percent, even if the health care is free. The national sport of these degenerates involves water so that even newborn babies can participate. There is no need to build stadiums or sign contracts. The rules always in flux, and nobody minds because in their tongue there are 29 words for lovingly conducted sportsmanship. When the national sport is played at night, they find it even more beautiful. Bodies remembering how they came from the sea. Us, we never slept in the ocean. Our ocean is for food and oil and refuse and conveyance, a vast nothingness to get across. The space program of these reprobates consists of Bertha, a single ship shaped like a giant egg, which their scientists annually encourage local school children to decorate in pastels and stickers. Nota bene, Bertha has never been anywhere. Also, the bulk of their aeronautics program focuses on mind training and breathing deep, learning to be happy with this world's endless frontiers. The legs of these infidels, or, not to put too crude a point on it, the rosy fork where they meet, as when a secondary queen goes out into the world to make a new hive, how half the colony goes with her, and in the interregnum, the bees temporarily massing around their sovereign until the new palace is secreted. Remember, the Greeks used honey to preserve their war dead so that they could be sent home from battle daisy fresh. It's the world's oldest cliche. Soldier, resist the sweetness. The skin of these incorrigibles will be the thing that makes you knock-kneed, this nation's pelts that call to mind sugar still glittering in the cane. No, it's their weak spot, the hours they spend oiling themselves until golden, as if preparing the body for the roasting pan, even the breasts plump with fat, and the savor rising all the way to their godless heaven. O sons of the motherland, One touch of their apple-tight skin and instant blindness, webbed hands, hirsuteness, mongoloidism. The dreams of this barbarian horde are strangely dark given the race's other propensities. Horse dreams, food dreams, dreams of the coming of weather, dream of the knife and dream of the rusty nail, and the dream of welding them both against the neighbor. Dream of the unending love, dream of the one-night stand, dream of the tongue on the mother's dirty nipple, dream of the hammer man coming to brick her in. Soldier, don't fall in love with the profligates of this world. Consider, the children of such unions, their hearts misshapen, miscellaneously lobed. These women with their white sand ways, their breadfruit aquamarine voices that want to initiate you in their love sports. Instead, imagine a lemon squeezed directly into your mouth. Imagine sitting on a block of ice. Even when she looks at you and you realize you could finally put down the mantle you took up as a boy and be embraced for who you are. In the name of God and country, lose not a single drop from your loins. The metaphors of these stone-aged primitives are ship-shape, moon-tight, bottom-fogged. There is no metonymy as there are no substitutions, though a part for the whole is acceptable. Pig-headed, bed of apples, ruined. When she meets the enemy face to face, she feels the trapdoor springing open to her heart. Here, the cruelest month is Loveless Friday. The back seats in the cars of these troglodytes are covered in midnight black naga hide worn thin in spots. You, as the sworn enemy of these people, should never feel the upholstered seams imprinting on your naked buttocks. But if you do, make your lovemaking a part of your warcraft. Remember, only the females of mammals and nematodes, a phylum of long cylindrical worms, have vulvas. Do whatever you have to do. The most erogenous parts of the body are also the most vulnerable. The bones of these fundamentalist D-bags snap like chalk as you learn on the night you slam her against the wall, wanting to know who threw the grenade. Don't look at me. You're the one whose schedule has become so predictable, every kindergartner can set her watch by your comings and goings. After it happens, set the bone yourself. Use firewood if you have to. When you're done, hold her in your arms. Feel her heart hammering as if a hummingbird were trapped in her ribs. Whatever you do, don't tell her you're sorry. Don't feel sorry in the least. The tears of these gluten-eating Philistines disappear at first light. Each morning she gives you the widest smile, still smiling even when you go away to Bangkok on R&R. Nothing sticks to them. Not like the time I was passed over for commandant and I took out my weapon when I got home and shot Mr. Kibbs, my kid's long-haired guinea pig, right through the eyes. This time, when we ghost, there won't be folks holding on to helicopters. This time, we're not even taking the bomb-sniffing dogs home with us. The medicine of these armpit-stained bottom feeders will, it's true, nurse you back to health after a friendly fire incident in which you were left for dead. But soldier, always carry my words in the pocket closest to your heart. When the war is over, will you be man enough to return here and claim your child, the one with eyes like blackest almonds, who dreams nightly of your return? On that day, her mother with the shaved head, no longer a pariah among their people. Yeah, I didn't point out that, so that particular poem has all of the titles are all those like insults, like, you know, gluten-eating Philistines, and then the titles run into the poem. So I had a lot of fun coming up with like different armpit-stained bottom feeders, you know, that kind of thing. So it was always fun. I'm gonna read. Let's see. I'm gonna read maybe 2 or 3 more poems and then take questions. But I've started this thing where I've started reading a poem by somebody else who's no longer with us. I think I'll read this one. I read it before. I don't think anybody here has seen me online, so hopefully nobody has seen me read this poem before. But so this is a poem by W.S. Merwin, who passed away a couple of years ago. This is his book, Travels. It's an amazing book. I was fortunate to see him read from this book at the University of Virginia way back in like 1992 or 1994. And I still remember the reading because he was such a mysterious person. Like, there were stories about him after he left campus that he was out with the professors at dinner, and that as they were going back to their car to take him back to the hotel, he like dropped onto his knees in the parking lot and began to like bow. And afterwards, people were sort of like, "So, Bill, like, what's going on?" You know? And he was like, "I always bow to the full moon, don't you?" You know? And so I just love that. I don't know if it's true, but that's what all the undergrads, that's what we were telling ourselves. So again, maybe it's true, but even as an undergrad, so as like a 19-year-old person, I remember reading this poem. I have no idea what this poem was about, but it haunts me. It's always haunted me. It's haunted me for more than 30 years. So this is a poem, again, from Travels, and it's called A Distance by W.S. Merwin. A distance. I would not go to such a place, the young, overweight doctor said, raising his needle to the fluorescent hour. A boy running on the grass path between flat pieces of light is holding high something he has caught that leaps and flashes in the sunlit brightness of its life. Scarcely do the ducks along the bank step out of the way, and the man standing bent almost to the surface in the water does not look up from his reflection, in which he is placing one green stalk. A straight, thin strand of smoke is rising from a white pile on the far side of the water by the hand-plastered tombs where hens bow in the shade of banana leaves. Beyond them, tile roofs, palm crowns, bamboo walls, clusters of white columns. What are you holding above your head, child? Where are you taking it? What does it know? So I was talking to one of my undergrads about it the other day. It was a phrase that poets were using maybe 10 years ago, but I feel like it's gone out of style again. It was a phrase that poets were talking about, this idea of like the breakthrough poem. I don't know, Brenda, if you were ever talking about the breakthrough poem, but yeah, I remember Tracy K. Smith talking about it. And so the breakthrough poem, as my understanding of it, is like, it's like the first time you write a poem, and for some reason you're just like, oh, that's how you do it. It doesn't mean that every poem you write after that is like great. It just means that you have this experience, right? And so it's true that this poem I wrote, I tell my undergrads, I had 5 writing workshops. I had 3 as an undergrad, and then I wrote this in my second semester in graduate school. So it just shows you, I had 5 classes before I finally wrote a poem and was like, So I just thought I will read for you. Again, it's from my first book, Asylum, and it's what I consider to be my breakthrough poem. It's called Lunar Eclipse, Chiang Mai. Chiang Mai is an area in northern Thailand, and basically it's about an experience I had there, so in Chiang Mai. And my book is like falling apart, so I would be like, oh no, stay together. All right. Lunar Eclipse, Chiang Mai. Nobody knew it was coming. Evening, we fell out of the river. The elephants took us with them because they had to. Some of us laughed. The boy with the bamboo crop said we were almost there. He smiled like a flower, pressed and red. In the village of the people with the necks long as glass, the children dancing for coins, we spent all night thinking of waterfalls, how summer's black razor opened our faces. Then we knew, like a soldier dying with a message, the blood spice, the smoke. We saw pages of darkness. The earth lay down like a child in the road. We spoke into our own mouths, and still they were shells of bones. High in the Thai hills, a people wiped the call from the eye of their only God. The how is a secret. The why brought our conversion. Fall on your knees, it's rising. Out of the forest with its trophy of hair. I'll read one short poem, and then I will take questions. Let's see, so what's my short poem going to be? I'll read this poem. I didn't necessarily write this as a poem. I wrote it more as an actual sort of manifesto, because after various elections that happened, I thought, my goal was to start a group of like poets and writers and matching us up with graphic designers, because I feel like the left is losing the the naming game. Like our words for things stink, you know what I mean? And I'm like, oh man, the right's doing so much better. So I was gonna have this whole thing like, we would come up with better phrases, and then we would design like an infographic, so that graphic would become like the symbol of these phrases. But yeah, all I did instead was write this poem, which really isn't a poem. But anyway, but the poem, which again wasn't originally a poem, but the poem is called I Am Pro-Living Because. So I always think that pro-living is a better, like I'm pro-choice, but I feel like pro-living is a better phrase. And so this poem talks about why I am pro-living. So I am pro-living because I believe in the heart. I believe we are all interconnected, webs within webs within webs. Each moment of intersection jeweled and shining, sacred. I believe in the oak, the wonder of its green canopy here on earth. I believe in the body's intelligence. I believe I know what's best for me. I believe in community. I believe in strengthening the human family, which means caring for mothers and children. Children whose birthright includes health care, daycare, food security, body dignity, clean air, pristine waters, education, adults who make a living wage. I believe in cultural vibrancy. I do not believe in darkness or in shame. I believe there is a difference between life and true embodied living. I have faith in individual agency as guided by our inner light and/or our gods. I believe in empowering this light to shine. I believe the only absolute is love. So on that note, are there any questions? Questions? And again, then I will finish up with one final poem if there are any questions, though. Anne. So does the person asking the question need to?
Yes, I'm sorry to forgive the intrusion, but if those in the room would ask questions into this microphone, that way people on Crowdcast can hear the questions. Thank you so much.
I'll come over here. Okay, so first I want to say that the word courage comes from the French word for heart, and you were clearly a woman of great courage. It was beautiful reading, thank you. I have a question about Eyes Wide Open to the Dark. You know, if you just let it come at you, it can overwhelm you. So I'm guessing you have kind of a deliberate way of going about that. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so again, the idea of ways in which, because I write a lot about traumas in various kinds of ways, and so how do I manage to do that without necessarily feeling overwhelmed by the kinds of things that I write about? I think for me, and a lot of it is instinctual, I think how I don't even think about it as protecting myself, it's just sort of how I live. And so for example, one of the basic ways is the fact that I don't use my first name. So people here in Wisconsin, people in Massachusetts know me as Amy. Amy is my first name, but again, I publish and I have a career under this entity called Quan Barry, right? So right off the bat, I've always made that distinction. And I believe that for me, making that distinction, it has to go both ways. It can't just be that if something bad happens, hey, that happened to Quan Barry, and I feel protected from that. But it's the same thing if something good happens to Quan Barry, there's a part of me that I actually don't super care either, right? So it's both. I don't put weight in either of those things, in good things or in bad things. So that's one way that I've kind of learned to protect myself in various ways. Honestly, the ways in which I do need to protect myself has much more to do with like the publishing industry than it does with anything I write about. For whatever reason, and I can't say why it's true, but when I write about things, they don't get in here in ways that are problematic for me. For example, right now I'm working on, I finished a draft of a horror book that's set in Antarctica, and it's true, like, it's pretty horrific. People die in Antarctica in all kinds of grisly ways. And I sleep just fine. Yeah, so in that sense, and again, I wish I could give you something tangible to use to be able to say, like, how is it that those things don't get in here? And I do think, because my students will ask me this sometimes, I think for me, it's the idea that writing is my outlet. So I think if I didn't write, that I would carry those things in here and I would see what's happening in the world, and it would be, but because I have a space in which I can say certain things, that's actually for me how I work it out. I don't want to say exactly that like writing is therapy, you know, I mean, I think there's obviously a time and a space for that kind of thing, but it's true that by putting it down, I don't have to carry it. I also think that for me, because I work in more than one genre, it allows me then to have different voices. My poetry is not funny, it's pretty dark. But I discovered that in fiction and in playwriting that I can be funny, which I didn't really know I had a funny writing voice until I wrote my second novel. And that's really been helpful too, to be like, oh, I do have this other space where if I want to, I can be funny. And so that's helped me a great deal. But just the last thing I would say in thinking about, because my students oftentimes will ask me about writing about trauma. And I was recently at the Wisconsin Book Festival, and two of my colleagues were talking a bit about this. My colleague Beth Nguyen, who had written a memoir about her family history. She herself, Vietnamese refugee, and has a particular relationship with her own mother. And she was talking about, how does she write about that? Again, it's a fairly painful history. And the two of them, had discussed the idea that sometimes, we feel like when we're in the middle of something, we feel the need to write it right away, which could be one way of doing it. I am somebody, apparently, who gives things time and space. So, for example, it's true that I have been wanting for a while now to write something about what's happening in the Middle East, but I haven't sat down and done it yet. And I guess, even though I want to, that maybe now for me is not the time. And so maybe I need more time to sort of process and really think about what I think about that. I've been talking with a lot of friends because I feel like poetry is all about nuance and complexity. And if I can't write a poem that's nuanced and complex about what's happening in the Middle East, then why do I write poetry, right? But again, my final thoughts on this is just the idea that apparently I just need time. So I do think that time, at least for me, is a major sort of buffering component that allows me then to look at more difficult sort of subjects. But thank you for the question. Anything else?
So, I was actually wondering about your relationship to time in some of the memories that seem to be pushing some of the poems. The poem in Lake Mendota, and then the first one, Auction, and then I'm just wondering, is it similar in terms of coming to work with a memory that you need time, or does it start kind of right away after the experience?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. More and more, as I mentioned, being Buddhist adjacent, and Anne knows a lot of this from being in the group that I'm in, I really am trying much more to live a sort of instinctual life where I don't question things so much, and I just kind of see what's going to happen. That doesn't mean I succeed by a long shot. And so as far as time is concerned, I'm getting to a place where I'll just sort of watch and just see, because I realize that a lot of the mental chatter I have about I should be doing this, I should be writing this poem, it's not helpful, and in the end, it doesn't make anything happen any faster, right? And so in thinking about the poem, the title poem, Auction, I had that experience at Yaddo in 2014, and I remember being there and thinking, this is weird, watching these amazing horses come in, these incredibly beautiful creatures, and then the idea that somebody buys them and owns them, and I remember just being really freaked out by that. And at the time, I don't remember if I thought, I'm going to eventually write about this, but I was definitely very much haunted by it. And I think it was actually years before it suddenly occurred to me, oh, hey, maybe I'm going to write a poem about that, So it's different with each piece. I can't say that it's true for any one thing. So with that particular piece, it was years, and then I was like, I'm going to write a poem about that thing that happened 4 or 5 years ago. Whereas, again, what I'm thinking about now with respect to the Middle East, I don't know when that will become something. Similarly, as I mentioned, the horror novel that I'm working on, I was in Antarctica in 2004, and I only realized how I could use it in a novel last year or the year before, right? So a lot of those things, it really is time just sitting back and I think for me, I've gotten better about not forcing things, because usually for me, anytime I force something, it's not good. And so just trusting that if it wants to be something, it will be. And if it doesn't want to be something, it won't be, which sounds very new agey, I know, in certain kinds of ways. But as of right now, it seems to be working for me. So, but thank you.
There is one that we have from Crowdcast, from Anna, thank you. Which says, your delivery of the poems is a part of the experience. It changes the text's perception. Is that does that come naturally? Do you sound out when you write?
Interesting. So I know a lot of poets and a lot of fiction writers also have, as part of their practice, that they read out loud to know how things are working. I find that for me that truthfully that could be a way to I could fake myself or I could lie to myself about how well something's working. So for example, and I am no James Earl Jones, obviously, but you could have something that's really terrible, but James Earl Jones makes it sound like really great, right? That can happen in playwriting often, when you have amazing actors who read things for you and you think, my play is done, but it's like, no, that was just an amazing actor giving you an amazing reading, right? And so I do not read out loud or as I'm drafting, but I do reread. Again, it's just not out loud, and I reread constantly. It's actually more true in my fiction practice than it is in my playwriting practice. So in fiction, I do not recommend, somebody asked me this a couple days ago, but I do not recommend revising the way that I revise. So basically when I revise in fiction is I have to reread something over and over, and so I'll reread it, I'll make changes, I'll upload it again as a clean PDF to my iPad, so that way it looks like a clean piece of paper. I used to, in the old days, just keep printing and printing and printing. And then I will read it again, and then I'll make changes, and I'll print it out. So just like over and over and over reading something until I don't snag on it anymore. And I do think in fiction, I notice it much more because in fiction, it's much more about timing, particularly in my second novel because it's comedic. Timing in that was really super important, just to get like jokes as tight as possible or timed out in certain kinds of ways. And I do credit the fact that I was a poet first before I was a fiction writer with helping me understand things about timing and compression of language. But yeah, so the idea that, this person was very kind to say that listening to me read the poems is also part of the experience. It's not in any kind of way that I've thought out consciously. So I think in some ways, I'm from Boston, although my mother's from Wisconsin. I'm a fast talker by nature, and so I've really, through the years, had to practice or be conscious of slowing down when I read publicly, or even when I teach. I always have to be very conscious of, like, speaking slower, and so that also means, like, enunciating and all those kinds of things, so. But thank you. Anything else? If anybody does have any questions after this, I'd be happy to answer them again out front. But I'm going to finish up with one final poem. I haven't mentioned it yet, but many of my poems actually come from things that I hear on NPR or things that I hear on CNN. Yes, it's kind of crazy if I actually went through all of my books and was like, how many of these poems were inspired by something on NPR? It would be, I am a member, I have the tote bag, so I feel like I'm giving them credit in certain kinds of ways. But this is a poem. So this is a good example about time, because I don't remember, I wish I could remember like how quickly I wrote this after what was happening, but basically I was watching CNN on my computer, and this was when our 45th president was in office, and if you remember, obviously those terrible images of children being separated from their families and put in cages along the southern border. And on CNN, they were interviewing local people in a cafe along the border. And I remember watching this interview with this couple who were sitting at a table in a cafe. And the man basically said, it's a paraphrase, but he basically said that he didn't care at all about those people. Like, he didn't care what happened to them. He did not care. And I remember hearing that and just being like, and I've written 2 poems about it, and I'm just going to read the first one. So there's 2. There's part 1 and part 2. So I'm going to read part 1. But so yeah, I couldn't say like how long it was after that happened that I decided to write a poem about it. But so this poem theoretically starts obliquely. It starts with a memory that I have of an afternoon with my grandparents. So as you'll hear, so it begins with me as a child. And so the poem relates, and again, an experience I had with my grandparents in Boston, and then it shifts into that other space where other things were happening. So, the man on the TV in the border town says he feels nothing for them, part 1. It was just after lunch in the yellow room when I wouldn't get out of the car, and how pleased my grandmother was made by this news, wrapping her arms around me as I sat there in the front between her and Grandpa, and they did what they threatened they would do. They took me home with them. past the point of pines where the planes come down over Boston Harbor. Just the other night, I dreamed of the two of them, happy and shining, as I threw the blue blanket over their bed. It was good to see them, to be reminded of the afternoon when I was 4 and I crawled in their car after lunch and would not be moved. And so they took me home to Winthrop, just east of Boston, where my grandmother floated happily around the kitchen as there was a child in the house again, the feel of her hand on the back of my neck, a presence I can feel even now when I am still. But later, after the sun went down, a child of 4, I missed my home, my brothers, my sister, my dog, the lion quilt my mother hand-sewed for me that I slept under each night. And so my parents were summoned to drive through the dark and come and get me. And they did, they do, they will. They are coming even now through this terrible dark, child. They are coming with all of their love and all of their hope, with everything they are. They are coming. Please believe we are coming for you, even if the world would have you believe we aren't. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone here, out there, everyone here. I hope you'll visit the bookstore and generally enjoy the good company for a little while. Good night, everybody.